Good morning, everyone. Get all these punctual employers. I love it. So, as we allow more people to find their way on, if you can join Coach Kiana Shaw Tatum in the chat box, definitely locate where that is. That's where we'll be interacting a little bit. Figure out where that Q&A box is because I'm sure you're going to be either coming into this with questions or as the content goes along, you might have some questions. So that Q&A box is the best place to put your questions in. I'll go over this all in a moment, but just some little side work while we give another moment for people to find their way in. But another thing we'd love is if you could, as so many people are already saying good morning in the chat box, but where are you joining us from in San Bernardino County? Either what organization or what area? We always love to know also how many employees are in your organization. That's always really helpful to know. Have you called into that complimentary San Bernardino HR hotline? Love to know that as well. Oh, Louis Vuitton. Okay. Very fancy. I love it. Cool. We'll keep that engagement going. We love to see all of this right out of the gate. I love an engaged group. So keep that going in the chat for us. But in the interest of time, I know Astrid has quite a bit to go over with us, and you probably have questions. So welcome everyone to the 2026 Wage and Hour Updates webinar. This is brought to you by our partners, the Workforce Development Board of San Bernardino County, who you will meet in just a moment. But before we get into today's training, I just have a couple of details to go over with you, especially if this is your first time training with us. So as you see, your audio is muted for today's presentation, but there are going to be lots of opportunities to engage during the training as you're already doing so wonderfully in the chat. I love to see it. But if you do have any questions about the content, those are going to come up. But if you want to enter those into the Q&A box at any time, we'll have Mary there working to address those questions as we go. So as you can see, the chat box moves very, very quickly. And so in order to make sure that that question is addressed, we'd love to have those in the Q&A box. If you do put it into the chat box, I might just nudge you to put into the Q&A just to make sure that that the attention gets paid to that question. Handouts for this training will be dropped into the chat box shortly. So once you see the little PDF icon and file name pop up, you should be able to just click on it and it'll download locally to your drive. I know if you're joining from a tablet, mobile device, or if your download settings or computer settings are such that they don't allow for downloads from Zoom, in which case just wait for an email from our team by end of day usually, and that'll include a little more information as well as that copy of the PDF of the slide deck. So not to worry, we will get that information to you. As you saw when you logged on, the webinar is being recorded and the team over at San Bernardino County will be reaching out when that is available for review. So make sure you are active on their email list. And then we'll also be inviting you to share your feedback at the end of today's training by participating in a very brief survey. So it's only 5 questions. It takes about a minute to complete, but the feedback that you share with us, we really do take to heart here at CEA. We share that feedback with our partners over at San Bernardino, and we just collectively make sure we are meeting and hopefully exceeding your expectations with trainings like this. So at the end, you'll see a slide with a QR code. I'll also drop a link into the chat for your convenience, and we hope that you'll take a minute to help us continue to help you. So again, our training today is brought to you by our partners over at San Bernardino County. And today we're so pleased to be joined by Desiree Thomas, Business Services Technician, who's here to share more about those resources available to employers like you. Good morning, Desiree.
Good morning. Thank you, Anna. And thank you everyone for joining us for another one of our monthly workshops brought to you by the always engaging speakers of the CEA. As you've seen in may have seen in our flyer, the Workforce Development offers a wide range of services to support small businesses. We have 3 America Job Centers here in San Bernardino County, 1 in San Bernardino, another in Rancho Cucamonga, and 1 in the High Desert in Victorville. We also host multiple job fairs throughout the county. So if you have any hire needs, just please let us know. One of our most popular services is the On-the-Job Training Program. With the help of WIOA funding, we can assist businesses with their hiring needs by reimbursing 50% of wages paid for up to 3 months while training a new employee. So if you're interested in taking advantage of this program, please reach out and we'll love to help. And as you know, we host monthly businesses business and HR workshops like the one you're attending today. So be sure to register early for next month's session on the mid-year labor law update happening on July 22nd at 10 a.m. and I will post that in the chat later. So now, in addition to these services, our business services team also works closely with business consultants who help employers access funding for improvements such as encumbered working training, social media marketing, and leadership training, and much more, all designed to increase productivity and prevent layoffs. We also recently rolled out an exciting transitional job training program, essentially a part-time paid internship where the county serves as the employer. We provide candidates for your consideration for up to 320 hours. It's truly a win-win. Your businesses get additional support while helping unemployed job seekers gain valuable work experience. So, and if you're like me trying to save some money, just take advantage of our complimentary HR hotline at 1-877-282-3763. I'll also provide that in the chat as well. We also offer an employer toolkit where you can access a variety of resources as well as links to partners throughout San Bernardino County. Be sure to bookmark our website at workforce.sbcounty.gov to view our calendar of upcoming events. If you're interested in any of these services, I'll be placing my contact information in the chat and as well as one of our specialists. Please feel free to reach out so we can set up an appointment to discuss your further needs in more detail. Thanks, as always, for your time. And without further ado, I'll hand it back to our wonderful Anna and fabulous speaker, Jessica.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Desiree, for everything that you and your amazing team do for employers in your area and beyond. So now I have the great pleasure of introducing our trainers today. We have Astrid Servin, our HR director, delivering the content, while Mary Bradford, our senior HR director, will be managing the Q&A behind the scenes. So you are collectively in great hands. And Astrid, it's all yours.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Desiree, for that introduction this morning. It sounds like you all are in great hands in San Bernardino County. I'm in San Bernardino County as well. So I'm happy to be here this morning from California Employers Association. We are a nonprofit HR company based out of Sacramento. We want to just tell you a little bit more about us. You have that wonderful HR hotline. I know I see some familiar companies and names in the chat. So we may have spoken, you may have called in and gotten either myself or Mary on the line, and we're happy to help. And what that hotline does is provide hopefully peace of mind for you. We offer HR services, HR support for you and whatever's going on in your workplace from beginning to end, from the beginning cycle of an employee all the way to the end when we have to sometimes terminate employees. If you feel like you need additional support more than what the HR hotline for San Bernardino County offers, you may want to look to us for additional membership options. So we do offer a membership at CEA where you can get additional support such as employment forms, policies, guidelines, fact sheets. We offer training. We do a lot of complementary training, such as similar topics like this one, everything from compliance to more educational, more hands-on training where we go on site. So all kinds of stuff that you can think of when it comes to the employee cycle. So give us a visit at employers.org and you can see all the things that we help with, investigations, labor negotiations, things like that. And then we also offer partners. If something that we can't help you with, then we also have partners where we can refer you to. What we are not is a law firm, so we ask that you please not use this presentation as legal advice. We will be talking a lot about wage and hour laws, but it is educational. And if something does come up of legal significance, you may find that maybe you were doing something that you shouldn't have been doing, maybe something wrong, and there's some penalties involved that you may have to pay. Well, we want you to consult with your own attorney, and that conversation will be privileged and confidential. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. And I love the engagement in the chat. Keep it going. And if you do have a question, we just ask that you use the little bar that says Q&A, the question and answer, because Mary, my wonderful colleague, is there and she can answer those questions for you. So we have a very full agenda this morning and not a lot of time to cover wage and hour. We only have 50 minutes to go. So I'm going to get started. These are all the things that we're going to discuss today. Not surprising, here in California, there's a lot of laws covering how we pay our employees. So we're going to start with the fundamentals and discuss some specifics and go over best practices in all areas, wage and hour. So where do we get our guidance from? Where do we know where to start? How do these things come up? When we give you this guidance, where does it come from? It comes primarily from these 4 areas here. The California Labor Code is going to be something that we use primarily here in the state of California. It's laws that are passed by the legislator in the labor code, and then we then combine that sometimes with specific wage orders. So every industry, you can see in the chat, we have people from all over the industries. Well, we have 17 wage orders in California that dictate how we are supposed to function and pay our employees. And that wage order, by the way, does need to be posted in your work site with your posters, your employment posters. So make sure that you know which wage order your company falls under. And in general, they're very similar in the way we pay our non-exempt employees, but that is where we get our guidance from primarily, and that does need to be posted, again, right by your employment law posters. It is not included in that all-in-one inclusive poster. It is something that's separate, but you can print it out directly from the DIR's website. So if you want to go to www.dir.ca.gov, that's dir.ca.gov, and look over the wage orders, you can select which order applies to you, and that's the one you're going to print out and post at your workplace. We also have local ordinances that sometimes dictate how we pay in that area where your employees work. So your employees may be working in the Bay Area, for example, and that local ordinance in the Bay Area will dictate how we pay or how we pay employees in that area. So sometimes local ordinances will help us decide how we our relationship with that employee. And then finally, we have case law. Those are court decisions, and case law also shape these rules by interpreting how the laws, like from the labor code, from the wage orders, how they apply to real world examples. So real world workplaces that we've had. And so sometimes we get our directions from these case laws. So we put all these things together, and that's how we know how to pay our employees. So let's start from the very beginning of defining who is an employee, because an employer doesn't get to choose who our employees are. California has a strict legal test that governs how we define who an employee is. So let's start with that definition. An employee is anyone who performs services for the benefit of the employer. This includes anyone who isn't even a minor or an undocumented worker. If they're performing services for you and it benefits you, the employer, they are considered by default an employee. So this matters because when we talk about minimum wage, when we talk about most wage and hour laws, we're talking about those laws that apply to your employees. So therefore, we got to make sure we get it right. An employee is not an independent contractor, and I do see that some of you have independent contractors within your workforce, and that's one where we're not going to spend a ton of time on in future slides, but we want to make sure that we actually have our independent contractors classified correctly, because that could be a very costly mistake. So I'll quickly go over an independent contractor has to be, in order to be eligible for that, it can't just be where the worker says, I want to be an independent contractor. In California, you do have to pass what we call an ABC test. So to be eligible to be an independent contractor, you have to meet both A and B and C. And these are it. A is the worker is free from the control of the direction of the employer, meaning the worker controls how they do their job. And then we have to also have B, which is the worker performs work that is outside the usual course of the employer, meaning the work your worker is doing is completely different from the core business that you do at your job. It's very different. You're hiring them for a specific project or a job. And then C, the worker is customarily engaged in an independently established trade or business, meaning that worker already runs their own business, their own separate business. They have that's what they do. Maybe it's a graphic artist who you're hiring to do your graphic artistry for your company. That's not what you do. You are maybe a engineering company, but you're hiring this graphic artist as an independent contractor. They meet all three, A, B, and C, and now you can successfully hire them as an independent contractor, and the wage and hour laws of California will not apply to them. And then the other one we have that wage and hour laws do not apply to because they are not employees are interns. And the main idea with an intern is that the internship is tied to the intern's formal education program by integrated coursework, and they're getting academic credit. So a student learning a trade, not an employee, the student must be primarily a benefit from the relationship, meaning they receive school credit again or training similar to a vocational school. And their work, by the way, shouldn't replace a regular employee's job. This is, in other words, benefiting that intern. That worker is the intern, and it's benefiting them by getting that school credit. All right, let's keep going here. And now that we've defined our employees, and I changed, if you got this slide, I changed it up a little bit from, it was in the exempt to non-exempt. I like to go over non-exempt hourly first. So we're going to move on to this definition of an hourly employee, which we call a non-exempt employee, versus an exempt employee, sometimes referred to as a salaried employee. So let's review what our non-exempt, our hourly folks do. They are paid, that's probably the majority of your workforce. It should be 80 to 90% of your workforce should be your hourly workforce because they are paid. And this is also the default, by the way, in California. Our default is an employee who is an hourly employee, and they're paid by the hour for the work that they're performed. Overtime laws apply. So we're going to talk about overtime and extensively, how much do we pay and all that. But those overtime laws do apply to your employees or hourly employees. They are subject to meal and rest breaks. We're going to review when do they get a meal, when do they get rest breaks in future slides here, but they are entitled to those. And there is stringent record keeping requirements, meaning your hourly folks do have to, they're required to have a time card, some sort of timekeeping system. It could be on an Excel spreadsheet, but we do need to keep time. And the reason for that is because we do need to see a start time and an end time, because we need to see if overtime applies. We also need to see if they worked enough hours to have a meal and rest break. And so we want to log those hours. We need to log when they took their meal period to ensure that they've taken it at the appropriate time, because the law dictates that too. So therefore, that is why it's very strict to have that time card and to keep it correctly. If they are not a non-exempt employee and you want to have them be an exempt employee or a salary employee, they must pass the exemption test, which has two things, a duties test and a salary test. And we'll review what those duties and the salary test is next. But basically, they're paid a flat salary for the skill they bring to do the job. So we're hiring you, you have a special skill set, and we're going to just pay you a flat salary. That flat salary we have to meet that minimum, but that's okay. We can do that for our exempt folks. And that means that our wage and hour laws, most of those do not apply. Overtime, meal, and rest, that's not going to apply to our exempt folks. So they really don't need a time card. I know some companies do keep that for just record keeping purposes. It's not required. And so there's a lot fewer compliance issues. So it's an attractive thing to have an exempt employee working for you, but we just need to make sure that we're getting it right and that we're meeting that eligibility for that employee. Okay, let's talk about those exemptions for our exempt folks. If they are going to be exempt, there are certain exemptions. They have to fall under one of these, at least one of these three. There's a few others, but this is the most popular ones. This is where, again, most of your exempt folks are going to fall under the white collar exempt categories. And if you go to our website at employers.org, we do have these exempt worksheets available to you, and you can actually go on there and do a quick summary and analysis of whether they're eligible or not. So an executive is one of the again, more common ones. The primary duty is managing 2 or more full-time employees in your work unit. Administrative is another popular one. This is where the employee's work directly relates to management policies or general business operations. They're using independent judgment and discretion, and it's high-level work. Typically, something like an office manager wouldn't work under this. unless, again, it's a very high level office manager taking care of very high level work, management material, and they are making those decisions on their own. And then finally, professional. They're in the field of science or learning and have a license. Usually there's a license involved with that one. So a professional is another common one. So these are the three most common. We do have a couple other ones: computer professional, sales professional, that may also fall under those exemptions. The exempt duties test. So we covered the white collar and how they need to meet that criteria. There is also a duties test. So meaning that primary duty for that administrative professional or executive, they got to do that most of the workday. So 51% of the job duties has to be functioning in that capacity. You're again using that independent judgment, use of discretion. So again, I had mentioned those office managers sometimes are questionable, but again, I encourage you to go to employers.org, find those exemption worksheets on there and work them out. Make sure that you are meeting that exemption duties test for those folks. And again, this is a small part of your workforce, right? And typically in an environment, most of your workforce is going to be hourly, and there's going to be a few that are exempt. And there's some exemptions to that too, exceptions, because I see there's like a few of you that are an engineering company, and typically engineers are exempt. All right, so what do we need to pay our employees? Well, we got to pay them at least minimum wage in California. And this is for all employers, regardless of size. We used to have this really long worksheet that was required because we did it based on employer size. But now we're all in 2026, where we all need to make at least $16.90 in the county of San Bernardino. You don't have anything special there. You are following the state's minimum wage. And then that means, because minimum wage is when we have minimum wage goes up, our exempt salary goes up too. Our exempt salary minimum wage is triggered by the state minimum wage. So it's 70,304 right now, which is quite a bit of a jump from 2025. And that is likely to continue to keep going up. In California, whenever the consumer price index goes up, they're tied together with minimum wage. So if that CPI goes up, California's minimum wage goes up, and that means our exempt salary goes up as well. So I want you just to know you don't have to have employees be exempt. You can, and again, it saves you a lot of headache because you don't have to track things. But if you're finding it hard to keep up with that minimum wage for salary, then you can go down to an hourly. You can figure out what that hourly rate is and now have those employees transition from exempt to non-exempt. We have a little employee relation tip worksheet that you can access for free. And that's just to help you remember certain things of when you're bringing down someone from exempt to non-exempt. There's a lot of things that become involved because now suddenly all those wage and hour laws do apply to that employee. So we want you to remember. And usually, typically, exempt folks are used to being exempt. So sometimes it's a little bit hard to transition to that. So I know Anna's probably going to put that into the chat if she hasn't already. So thanks ahead of time. Moving on, and I'm going quickly because we have a lot to cover, but some of you may be in the fast food industry. If not, you can tune me out for the next few seconds here.
Oh my
But
gosh, what a dream.
I'm hearing a little background noise, so just want to make sure. Okay, good. Some employers are subject to different minimum wage because they may fall under that fast food minimum wage. So this is Assembly Bill 1228, which was the Fast Food Workers Act, and major national chains will apply to this. So this is creating a minimum wage of $20 an hour. It did go into effect quite a bit ago, April of 2024, for covered workers. And because this minimum wage is tied to that fast food, in this industry specifically, the exempt employee minimum wage goes up to $83,200 if you want to have an exempt folks. So I'm assuming most employees in the fast food industry are having their management staff be hourly. Otherwise, they're going to be subject to this minimum salary of $83,000. Just a few other things to note in this fast food Senate bill that was passed. There is a fast food council under the DIR that was created, and they get to set the minimum wage for this industry. Now, they haven't changed it since April 1st, 2024, so that's good news for this industry. And it is, again, limited to just restaurants that are part of a big chain, 60 locations nationally. So it probably won't be most of you that are on here, but just want to mention that. Certain healthcare employers may be subject to Senate Bill 525, this minimum wage. With this one, instead of a single flat rate, it uses kind of a tiered system based on the size and type of healthcare facility that you are. To be an exempt employee instead of hourly, you have to follow this little calculation of 1.5 times the healthcare minimum wage or 2 times California minimum wage. I see some healthcare professionals that are maybe on today, so we encourage you to go onto the website. They are pretty clear on what you need to meet and what criteria you have to meet to see if you are an eligible employer under this Senate bill and whether you're subject to this, because there are going to be some increases coming up on July 1st. And again, it's a tiered system depending on employer size for the healthcare industry. I'm going to tell you most dentist offices are not going to fall under this unless they meet those certain qualifications. But another interesting thing with this one is that employees working at a facility, if they are eligible, it's going to include everybody in that work facility, including janitors, security guards, food service workers. It's not just, for example, nurses or healthcare workers. It's everybody working under that industry or in that company. Okay, let's move on because we do also have local minimum wage, and we talked about those local jurisdictions that might have higher minimum wage. And there are quite a bit in the state of California. We don't have any in San Bernardino County. However, it is dictated by where your employees are located and are working. So if you have remote workers working in San Diego, LA, San Francisco, for example, there are 40 local ordinances throughout the state of California. So you want to be vigilant and mindful of where your employees are located, whether they're working remote, whether they're driving into a certain city or county where they're conducting business for more than 2 hours, then that minimum wage, they're going to be subject to that minimum wage. And where there is a minimum wage that's higher than the states, typically we also get sick leave that's higher, or certain other little things such as predictive scheduling or flex time that also applies. So pay attention to where your employees are located, where they're working, because we want to be mindful. And we have you covered. We have a state and local minimum wage that you can follow. We update that quite regularly. We'll update that again in July because a lot of those local ordinances will go up in July, coming up next month here. One thing to note also, sometimes minimum wage is higher in a certain area, a certain city, these 40. When that happens, the state salary is still the same. We follow the state's salary for exemption. So just because the minimum wage in San Francisco, in, I'll say in Los Angeles might be higher, the exempt for folks in the state of California, we're going to follow the state's minimum wage, not the local ordinance's minimum wage. The only exception to that would be in the restaurant industry, where that salary has been dictated to be higher. Okay, moving on. Overtime and calculating regular rate of pay. You may be saying, what is regular rate of pay? We're going to have you covered because this is something that can be very costly if we get wrong. We get lots of class action lawsuits or PAGA claims, and we want to make sure we're getting it right. So just a refresher, I'm sure you all know in California, we pay overtime at 1.5 times, but that's 1.5 times the regular rate. So I'm going to cover what regular rate means in a future slide here. But again, it's for anything over 8 hours in a workday, we're paying that time and a half. We're also
Hey everyone, it's Mary. I think Astrid's computer might have froze up. Anna, are you seeing Astrid frozen?
I think she is logging off and back on. So in the meantime, this is a great pause for any questions. I see the Q&A has been active with a few
Yes.
questions. So this is a good time as Astrid is finding her way back online. Just as we're getting to the good stuff, Marcia said. So yes, just as we're getting to the good stuff. So there is a copy of the slide deck if you didn't already download it. Just scroll up a little bit, and then when you see that PDF, you should be able to click on that and download it. We also put a few resources into the chat with some links to additional, like I said, resources. This is also a good time to, if no questions are coming up for you, I know if you're like me, my questions come up after and I'm like, darn it. So take note of that complimentary HR hotline because that's how you can definitely get your follow-up questions answered. And then also, if you haven't registered for the July 22nd mid-year labor law update, that link is also in the chat. Let me just drop it in as well if you joined us after that. So
perfect. And I was just going to add too, Anna, we had a question about independent contractors come up. So for those of you that are CEA members, we do have some fact sheets that are available for you. And I'm just going to pop out and look at some state resources that have kind of some general information about independent contractors. And I will drop that into the chat box as soon as I find that. So everyone stay tuned. And then we also had a question, will the workshop be recorded and shared? So yes, Anna is recording that and then that will be sent to San Bernardino so that they can put that up on the appropriate venue if they need to. And let's see if Astrid is able to pop up. If not, I can jump in and take over. Let's see, I saw the links, but they are no longer there from the chat box. I wonder if we had a chat box issue.
I can
Not
work
sure.
on resubmitting those links. That's not a problem. Let me get to work on that.
Okay,
Mary, if
perfect.
you are
I think I will. Yeah, let me
jump on.
jump on
Thank you,
here.
everyone. This is the beauty and the pro and a con of a virtual setting, right? I think in the last few years we've all been in a situation where
Exactly. And let me pop over. I think she was on the regular rate of pay slide. So let me just get to that really quickly so I can make sure I'm sharing the right slide. Not that everyone doesn't want to hear about everything all over again. Okay, here we go. And then I will share from our current slide. Okay, perfect. Hopefully, Anna, you're seeing the regular rate and additional compensation.
we are, but we're seeing presenter view.
Well, we don't need to see that. Hold on, everybody. That sometimes happens with our friend Zoom. Sorry, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there. I promise we'll get this for you in just a moment. Oh, looks like Astrid might be popping back on, so hers might be queued up, ready to go.
Unfortunately, I can't get my internet back on. I'm on my phone. I was going to see
okay.
if you could get that presentation up. I can handle the Q&A.
No problem. Absolutely. Okay, let me, it just wasn't letting me share for a moment. Maybe Zoom's having a day as well. Hold on. Let me go back to it. Okay.
Something's in Gatorade, people.
I tell you. Okay. Is it a regular screen now?
Perfect.
Okay. Does it go to presenter view if I do this?
It does not. You are good to go. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Okay. Thanks, everybody. All right. Thanks, Astrid. Astrid's going to handle our Q&A for us. I will jump in to talk about regular rate of pay. All right. So as Astrid was telling you, we have to make sure we're considering that regular rate of pay, which is going to take all different forms of payment that an employee receives into figuring out what their regular rate of pay is. So that includes commissions, piece rate, if there's shift differentials, if you have employees who are working that swing shift or that graveyard shift, retroactive bonuses, and non-discretionary bonuses. The reason we're so careful about that regular rate of pay because it does affect our overtime rate, and we all know how important it is to pay overtime. So this is where we recommend work really closely with your payroll provider, with your bookkeeper, your CPA, who's ever doing payroll for you, to make sure when you're calculating your employee's rate and if there's overtime and they're receiving other forms of compensation, that they are getting paid the appropriate overtime rate. Because if you're just if you're paying your employees extra, commission, for example, or that shift differential, and then they're working overtime, but you're only paying them overtime based on that base rate and not their regular rate of pay, you can run into some problems. So be very careful with that. And this is also kind of a little CEA suggestion for you. If you are having issues with this and you're realizing it's becoming too complicated, maybe just consider paying your employees a slightly higher rate as opposed to paying them those different forms of remuneration that you might be giving them. Might make your life a little easier. So consider that as you're starting to look at maybe even budgets for next year. Instead of paying a lot of different rates, maybe just going with a higher base rate and basing overtime off of that might make your life a little easier. But give us a call at the hotline. We are happy to help talk you through that. No problem at all. All right, and then the other reminder we want to give you real quick is the always confusing OBBA, the OBBBA, which stands for that one big beautiful bill. And this was a lot of confusion employees had and employers had regarding this because it was reported, of course, at the federal level. So everyone got excited because they said, oh my gosh, we're going to get to, take a tax break on our overtime and we're going to get to have all these wonderful things happening. But what we have to remember in California, it's a little different for us because we have daily overtime. And at a federal level, there's only weekly overtime. So when they're talking about OBBA and how it affects people, it is only that qualified overtime, which is just the weekly hours, anything over 40 hours in a week. And so it's not California's daily overtime. So what we would recommend if you've got employees asking questions about this, again, work with your CPA, work with your payroll provider, because they do need to tag or code that proper weekly overtime in the system so that it is compliant with the new reporting requirements. So talk with them about it. I think it was a big change for people last year. People are getting a little more used to it this year, but it will need to be reported on tax documents, on W-2s and those kind of things moving forward. So employers and providers are getting a little more confident with this, but do check in with your payroll provider if you've got questions going on this one. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Equal Pay Act and pay transparency here in California. So this is something that you've probably heard about for a long time, but as usual with California laws, there are lots of changes that go into place. We always want to make sure that we are looking at the pay that we give our employees very objectively. And this is another reason why we talk a lot about having job descriptions and being consistent as you're managing your HR function, because you truly want to make sure that you have ranges that are set up for your employees and that people are being paid fairly. So that means we're not paying somebody less based on their race, their ethnicity, and we need to be very, very cautious with that at all times. We're looking at objective factors. So we want to look at how long someone has been with us, what level of education do they have, what kind of production are they doing for us, how are they doing as far as producing work for you. There were a couple of changes that went into effect for 2026 where they changed it to say another sex versus opposite sex in regards to how we make sure that we're paying people equally. We don't want to pay another sex a different rate, but they've amended that because it used to be opposite sex. So this is again just taking into account people who are transgender, identify with a different gender. They also expanded the definition of what wages mean to include some other benefits. Because sometimes when we're looking at our wages, there's overtime pay, bonus, stock options, all of those things can go into considering what wages are. And the other thing to remember is they're extending the statute of limitations to 3 years where an employee can make a complaint or bring up a concern. And it can now go back to 6 years for damages for these quote unquote continuing violations. So this is just a reminder. You want to make sure that you're holding on to your pay records. In the past, we used to advise 4 years was normally long enough to hold on to pay records. Now I think it's a pretty good idea to hold on to those for a little longer. So something to consider for your company, to make sure you're retaining those records in the event there's ever an issue that comes up, which we certainly hope there isn't for you. But good to hold on to those records because the burden is always on the employer to justify and show why they made those changes. Now, another thing we have in California is pay transparency, and a couple of states are also on the same page with California in regards to this. But again, as I mentioned before, job descriptions are a great thing to have, and pay scales are a wonderful thing to have, because in California, you as an employer are required to provide that pay scale information to your current employees, or if an applicant comes in to interview for a position, you need to be prepared to give them that pay scale information. Now, if you're a larger employer and have 15 or more employees, you are now also required to provide pay scale information in job postings. Now, again, that's been in effect for a couple of years, but we had a little more cleanup language for 2026. And what they said, and this was actually really helpful when this came out, they said that pay scale information that you need to provide in a job posting is that estimate of that starting wage. So in the past, if you, for example, had a pay scale and it ranged from, let's say, $20 to $30, that's how much per hour, that's how much you would put in the job posting. But now in 2026, you can just put what that starting range is. So perhaps the starting range is really only $20 to $23 per hour. So you don't have to include that entire range. You now just need to include that starting range in job postings. So again, required if you have 15 or more employees. We think it's a great idea to do it in general, but do whatever is best for your business. But if you have 15 or more, you're required to. Helps take out a lot of confusion when it comes to pay expectations for those applicants as well. All right, so when we're talking about wage and hour issues, of course, we're going to talk about rest breaks, meal periods, and wage statements. So I know a lot of you are very familiar with this, but keep in mind a rest break, you as an employer need to provide those to your employees. And the language with that is you need to authorize and permit your employee to take rest breaks. So really what this means is, what we suggest is, if you've got an employee who's working, we'll just go with the perfect schedule of 8 to 5. You say, all right, you start at 8 a.m. Sometime between 9:30 and 10:30, we want you to take a 10-minute break. And then sometime in the afternoon between 2:30 and 3:30, we want you to take another afternoon break. So you have authorized and permitted your employees to take those breaks. Ideally, they're in the middle of that work shift. That is compensable time. People are on the clock when they're taking that rest break. And you do want to make sure it's a 10-minute, a uninterrupted, duty-free 10-minute rest period. Now, we want to be careful about providing and authorizing our employees to take these breaks, because if we don't, there is a penalty, and that's known as a 1-hour premium pay penalty, where you need to pay your employee an extra hour of pay at their regular rate. There's that regular rate again, their regular rate of pay, if they are denied a rest break, or if they are not given rest breaks they're entitled to, or the rest break is interrupted, those things. So we want to make sure we're always providing those rest breaks to our employees. Now, here the breakdown when it comes to your rest breaks. If somebody is working less than 3.5 hours, they don't need to get one. 3.5 to 6, they have one. That's 6 to 10 hours, they get two, and so on and so on. The real thing to remember with rest breaks is you as an employer cannot require your employees to stay on site. They are allowed to leave your employer premises. They probably won't be able to go terribly far in 10 minutes, but in the past, you used to be able to restrict your employees and have them remain on site. You can no longer do that. So double check your handbooks. Another good reminder to make sure your handbooks are up to date for 2026. If you need help with that, give us a call at the hotline. We've got some good options and resources for you, but you do want to make sure you remove any language that says you have to stay on site or on company property. Not allowed anymore. So then let's talk about meal breaks, because this is the one that I think probably causes people more headaches. The rule when it comes to meal breaks, employees need a minimum 30-minute meal break. It is not 60 minutes. You can give them just 30 if you want to. And a 30-minute meal break must be provided if an employee works more than 5 hours in a day. Now, there is a carve out for waiving meal breaks, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But what I want to remind everybody of, if your employee is working over 5 hours, they need to make sure that meal period starts, so they are clocked out before the end of their 5th hour of work. And the language on this is very confusing in the regulations, so we broke it down for you, which means employees must clock out by 4 hours and 59 minutes into their shift. So that means if somebody starts at 8 a.m., then by 12:59, they need to be clocked out for that meal period. Same rules apply for meal periods as it does for breaks. Employees must be relieved of all duties. They are free to leave the premises. And we also want to make sure our employees are clocking out for that meal period. So by 4 hours and 59 minutes, they have clocked out for that meal period and their meal period has begun. Now, there is an opportunity, depending on the employee shift, that they might be able to waive that meal period. So as I mentioned before, if somebody's working more than 5 hours, they have to get a meal break, unless 6 hours will complete their day. So if you are only scheduling your employees for 6 hours or less, they have the opportunity to waive that meal period. That needs to be by mutual consent. So you and the employee agree to waive it, and you want to have a waiver in writing. So make sure this can be done as part of the new hire orientation process, but you want to have that meal break waiver on file. Now, if you have employees that are working longer shifts, because as you know, employees need to get another meal break for longer shifts, they can waive that second meal break if they are working over 10 hours, for example, but no more than 12, they can waive that second meal period as long as they took that first meal period. So a lot of you in manufacturing are probably dealing with this, but do make sure, again, you're going to have a meal waiver on file for either of those situations. The other thing to remember with meal waivers is both parties have the right to revoke it. So you as the employer or the employee can say, you know what, I want you to take a meal period today, and that meal period waiver is void for that day. We also want to make sure we never retaliate against our employees for taking a meal period. We never want to make them feel guilty or feel bad about taking a meal period. We want to, again, make sure they are free and able to take that meal break. Now, if for some reason you can't provide a meal period to them, you're looking again at that same penalty. It's a 1 hour premium pay penalty if they miss a meal break. And sometimes that just happens. Sometimes the nature of business won't allow an employee to take a meal break, and you can have them work through it. Of course, they're still on the clock, and then you pay them that extra hour of pay. Now, the thing to look out for meal periods, though, if you notice your employees are missing meal periods, you want to find out why, because your responsibility as an employer is to provide that meal period. If the employee is choosing not to take it, we need to document that to say that the employee could have taken it but chose to not take that meal period. And then you may not need to pay that meal period penalty. But again, we need to look into each of these. And this is also where we recommend that you have a policy on it so that you can enforce your policy consistently. And if your policy says you're required to take a meal period, you want to enforce that policy and coach your employees, remind them what they are required to do. So a couple of meal and rest period deal breakers that we've talked about. Remember, we make sure we give our employees time to take that meal period. We don't ask them to pick up the phone, unlock the door for somebody, or sign for a package. It truly needs to be duty-free. We want to let them take those rest and meal breaks. We want our employees to recharge so that they can continue on to their day, not get too tired, not get too hungry, all that kind of good stuff. Now, the meal period is unpaid, as I mentioned. Make sure your employees are clocking in and clocking out for that. When it comes to rest periods, those are paid. Your employees are not required to clock in and out, although I know some of you probably have your employees note in the system that they do take a rest period. That's perfectly fine. But again, keep an eye on that. And this is where we want to train our managers, our frontline supervisors, foremen out in the field, whoever it is, to double check those time cards to make sure that rest breaks as well as meal breaks are properly recorded at all times. So here is that premium pay overview that I was mentioning. So if you as an employer fail to provide your non-exempt, your hourly employees with that meal period, and again, with a 30-minute uninterrupted duty-free meal period, or they don't get their rest break, they don't get that full 10 minutes, or they're not given time for heat recovery, which we're all certainly dealing with. I know you have been cooking down in San Bernardino. I'm located in Sacramento. We have also been quite toasty see up here. So we want to make sure we're always giving our employees that heat recovery period if they need it. But if we don't give them heat recovery, rest breaks, meal periods, whatever it is, that's when that premium pay comes into play. So when it comes to rest breaks, there's only one premium pay due for missed rest breaks each day. So if your employee misses both rest breaks, you only have to pay them 1 hour of premium pay for missed rest breaks. Same thing for meal periods. There is 1 hour of a meal period premium pay that could be due each day. So be cautious with that because it gets to be very, very expensive. And we want to make sure that we're always, again, providing our employees those breaks that they are entitled to. When it comes to premium pay obligations, we do have some additional information on this. I think we've talked about pretty much all of these things, but another reminder I want to give you, and we'll talk about wage statements here, is you now need to put that premium pay that you may have given your employee for missed breaks or meal periods, that needs to be provided on the statement that you give your employees, their pay statement. So that needs to be a separate line item. So make sure, and you've all heard of PAGA, which can lead to some issues with wage statements not being correct. Make sure that wage statements line item those premium pay payments that you've made. So here's a rundown on everything that needs to be on a wage statement. There is quite a bit. I'm not going to go over these because you'll have them all in your handouts, but do make sure wage statements are complete and we've got a sample of what they should look like. There's a lot that needs to be on there. One of the things I always like to point out, because this comes up a lot, you want to make sure that the name and address of the legal entity that is the employer, you want to make sure the statement also matches that pay stub. Sometimes employers will put a DBA on the pay statement, but the wage portion will be different. Make sure that those two things match. A lot of employers have got in trouble for that. And then as you can see down kind of on the middle left, that's where we've got our regular rate of pay, the hours worked and how much the employee received, our overtime rate of pay, and then there's that premium payment. So you want to make sure that is showing up on all your pay stubs. And of course, we need to show all those deductions that we're taking out of all of that money that somebody is working hard for. And then the other thing to remember is paid sick leave needs to be provided on each of those pay stubs. You need to show that accrued and unused time off that an employee has. If that does not show up on the pay statements, then you do need to provide that in written form to your employees every single pay period. So make sure you are doing that as well. All right, so with our last couple of minutes together, let's talk about business expense reimbursements because this can get a little confusing. But what we have to remember is that we do need to reimburse our employees anytime they incur a cost on our behalf. So that means if you send your employee out and you say, hey, can you head to Staples and pick us up some packing tape? The time that they spend driving to go pick up that packing tape needs to be paid. That's paid time. They're on the clock. Also, we're going to pay their gas because we're having them drive their own personal vehicle and we need to reimburse them for that. And then we're going to reimburse them for the cost of the tape that they purchased for us. So again, these are reasonable costs when an employee is traveling for us. So for example, if you're sending your employees to Las Vegas for a conference, you can set a reasonable amount that you will reimburse for the cost of their hotel and their meals, all of those things. This does apply to both exempt and non-exempt employees. We do, of course, need to reimburse them anytime they are incurring cost on our behalf. Then the other thing to remember is personal cell phone usage or mobile phones. Everybody has one. We're all addicted to them, as we all know. But we, as an employer, need to remember if we're requiring our employees to use their own personal cell phone to either make work calls, or if we're requiring them to clock in and out and use their personal phone by an app, and there's not another option for them, we need to reimburse our employees a portion of that cost. So what you can do as an employer is decide what is a reasonable amount, what's a reasonable percentage. A lot of phone bills these days are around $50 or $60, and you can decide, you know what, we've determined that you are using your cell phone for work-related calls, taking pictures at client sites of work projects we're doing, receiving email, etc., 20% of the time. Therefore, we're going to reimburse you 20% of your phone bill. So you as an employer can set that amount. And then if the employee says, no, that's simply not enough, then you want to have a discussion with the employee and find out what extra costs they're incurring to make sure that you are reimbursing them the appropriate amount for that. The other thing you can do too is you can ask your employees to provide you with a copy of their cell phone bill when you're having that discussion. We recommend also that you have a written agreement in place so it's clear what those expectations are and how much you will be reimbursing that individual, and also that they can contact you if they don't feel that they are being sufficiently reimbursed. Speaking of reimbursement and cars, I mentioned this just a second ago, but here's a little more detail for you on personal vehicle use. So when an employee is using their own car, and again, you send them out to Staples to go pick up packing tape, for example, as I mentioned before, you're going to pay them for their time, and you're going to reimburse them the cost of anything they buy at Staples for the business, but you're also going to reimburse them for their personal vehicle use. Every year, the IRS sets a mileage rate that they determine is what they think is reasonable for reimbursing gas, insurance, wear and tear on the vehicle. For 2026, it is 72.5 cents per mile. So we recommend that you have your employees track their mileage and that you reimburse that IRS rate, because when you do that, that is saying this is what the IRS says it costs for you to drive that vehicle. We're going to reimburse you this rate, 72.5 cents a mile. You drove 10 miles, we're going to give you $7.25. If you want to reimburse less than that, of course you can. And just like everything that Astrid and I have told you, you can do all of it or none of it. It is your choice because it is your business. But if you don't follow the guideline when it comes to this reimbursement and you say, you know what, I'm just going to give somebody $2 for running down to Staples, and it's less than this IRS rate, if something happens, you could be on the hook for that. So if they get a flat tire, if they get into some sort of car accident and you're not paying them enough to cover gas and insurance, etc., they could have a pretty good argument that you need to pay them a little more. So be very, very cautious with that. Now, the other thing I wanted to spend just another moment talking about PAGA, which I mentioned before, which stands for the Private Attorney General Act. This basically means that an attorney can sue you on behalf of your employees, even if your employees haven't actually retained them as an attorney. This kind of got out of hand over the past couple of years, and there were huge class action lawsuits that were costing employers a lot of money. But here's the good news. The state put in some PAGA reform provisions for employers, which is a really very positive move for employers. So CEA has tried to help you out with this as well by putting together a wage and hour audit package, which is a very helpful tool. Take a look at our website if that's something that you need, because now there are opportunities for you as a business to what's known as cure some of these wage and hour issues. So what that means is you as an employer can show you've been taking reasonable steps to catch wage and hour issues. So as I mentioned before, you're going to make sure you're reviewing time cards to make sure employees are taking their rest breaks and their meal breaks. You are going to make sure that employees are getting paid overtime properly. And you do all those things through payroll audits, and then you take action to make sure that you are correcting any errors that you might find. Also, you want to make sure you've got those policies. So there is my handbook plug again for you. Make sure you have policies that clearly spell out your rest break and your meal break requirements for your business, as well as how overtime is paid. Train your supervisors if they're right next to you, or if they're out in the field, or if you have multiple locations. Make sure everybody knows what is expected of them. And then, of course, take the appropriate action if your supervisors aren't following the guidelines when it comes to approving time cards, paying employees properly. Make sure you're really paying attention. Wage and hour, there's still lots of issues. The labor commissioner is still very busy receiving complaints from employees. So make sure you are staying up to date on that. Train everyone and do lots of audits and lots of reviews, and use our audit package. It's very handy. It's very user-friendly, and it'll take you step by step exactly what you need to do. All right, so just to wrap up wage and hour, and again, thank you everyone for hanging in there through some of our technical issues. Here are your big reminders. Make sure you are always paying minimum wage, and you're paying close attention to minimum wages in other areas. I know a lot of you might be spread out. You're in the Inland Empire, and maybe you're in the Central Valley as well, maybe even in the Bay Area. Lots of different minimum wage rates, as Astrid told you, more than 40, just to keep it exciting. So pay attention to those. Those change in January, sometimes April, certainly July 1st. So you're going to stay on the lookout for those. So stay up to date on those at all times. Adjust the salaries for your exempt employees as needed. If you've decided, you know what, we just can't keep you as an exempt employee, we need to change you to a non-exempt employee. Reminder, yes, you can do that. Just make sure you do it the right way. Use our fact sheet on that. Always review your wage orders. Take a look at those pay stubs. Audit your heart out so you can make sure that you can show you were taking those reasonable steps to do everything you could do as an employer to make sure your employees were being paid properly. So again, we want to thank our amazing partners at San Bernardino. We just have worked together for so long and love all of the services that they provide to you as an employer. And we're so happy that we're able to provide the HR hotline. You've got Astrid there. I'm on the hotline. All of our other colleagues are amazing and love to help you out. So call us at 877-282-3763. And do please make sure you use that number so we know where you're calling from. And you can also, if you ever need to send us a question, you can do it over email at ceainfo@employers.org, and we will set you up there as well. And then we would love to hear from you, and we would love to hear what other trainings you're interested in, any changes you would like to see. Definitely fill out that survey. You can use the fancy schmancy QR code right there. And I'm sure Anna is dropping that in the chat as well because she's amazing at that. And I do apologize because I don't have the HRCI codes dropped in here. So Anna, are you able to let everyone know? And I'm sure you're dropping those in there as well.
Those are just being dropped into the chat. So the HRCI code today is 745534, and your SHRM code is, oh, sorry, it's moving. SHRM code 26-CCEWU. Always reach out to us, ceainfo@employers.org, if you need any guidance on what to do with those. But those are dropped into the chat. And then the message above that, as Mary mentioned, the previous slide has that link to that survey. That's how you suggest topics that you'd like to hear in the future, or additional resources that you need to run your organization or your department with ease. And then the message right above that is the link to register for the next training. That's coming up on July 22nd at 10 a.m. And then that is, yes, Adriana, that is up. If you just scroll up a little bit in the chat, I promise that's there. We'll make sure that we include that link when we send out the PDF of today's slide deck as well. I know not everyone is always able to download from Zoom, especially if you're on a mobile device. So look for that email from either our team or the San Bernardino team today. We'll send you the PDF of the slide deck, as well as the link to register for that July 22nd mid-year labor law update that is chock full of more information. And then we'll also include the number to call that HR hotline, complimentary, by the Workforce Development Board of San Bernardino County. So again, thank you all for your time today. I know we've kept you an extra minute. Thank you for rolling with us with the technical issues in the middle there. And then stay tuned for that email, and then make sure you're active on San Bernardino's list to make sure that you get notified when the recording is available for your review. So thank you all again. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Astrid, for sharing your time and expertise and being so resilient today. Thank you, Desiree, for everything you and your team do. And thank you all for taking time out of your day to train with us. We look forward to talking with you more and seeing you next month for the next training. Thank you all. Cheers.